Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Mann, and welcome to this session, Systematic Solutions for Billing Approvals for Grants and Contracts. As I mentioned, I'm Jessica Mann, and I'm from a company called Spear MC Consulting. I started doing PeopleSoft consulting about 20 years ago, and for the last 18 years, I've been specializing in grants management. So that includes the modules grants, project costing, contracts, billing, which we'll be focusing on today, accounts receivable, as well as commitment control. I'd also like to invite you to check out our other Spear MC sessions. If you haven't had a chance to attend them, I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to the recording or download the presentation. A lot of great content. Yeah, real quick. Okay. So before I started the presentation, just wanted to give you a little bit of information about Spear MC. Here are our locations. Our headquarters is based out of the Bay Area, and we are now happy to have coast-to-coast coverage across the U.S. And we also have been doing a lot of work also outside the U.S. Lately, both in Canada, and I've also had opportunities to do grants implementations in South Africa, Uganda. So we're very excited about working with folks across the U.S. as well as across the world. We're also very excited to announce that we were recently recognized by Gartner. So Spear MC is the sole featured PeopleSoft vendor in the latest 2021 Gartner Market Guide for Oracle Professional Services. So if you have any interest in learning more about moving to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, we'd be very happy to talk to you about it. Here are the other areas that we specialize in. So definitely PeopleSoft is our focus, PeopleSoft Oracle Technologies. So PeopleSoft Financials, HCM, Supply Chain, Lease Administration, and Grants Management. We do quite a bit of managed services and also a lot of PeopleSoft training. So both on the functional side and technical side, we do live virtual training. And we also have training material that you can purchase directly from our website. So feel free to check it out. All of our courses are on our website. And then you can also purchase content directly, including our All Access Learning Pass, where you can gain access to training documentation as well as pre-recorded training. So a lot of great content there. I mentioned OCI already. We also do PeopleSoft test framework and test automation and help with PUM updates and some other Oracle technologies. Here is our agenda. Today we're going to be talking about the manager transaction review functionality, hold billing on unpaid costs, the billing worksheet, and the billing workflow approval. So it's I kind of sequenced it in sort of the order that this functionality would happen in the business process. And I told you a little bit about myself. Now I'd like to know a little bit more about you. I'm going to start a poll here. The first one is, what types of billing do you perform today? So this is multiple choice, so you can answer multiple times. Anybody seeing the poll? I'm not seeing any responses yet. Is anybody able to log into the chat if they're able to see the poll? Oh, there we go. Maybe I guess it just took a little bit. Okay, great. Okay, so I think you guys should be able to see the results as well. So we do have, oh, still going. Okay, maybe I should end it. 1 second. End poll. So you can see that we have folks that are doing grants billing, contracts billing. It looks like the next one is external billing. And then a little bit of some custom billing, miscellaneous billing, and inter-unit billing. Very cool. Thanks for taking that poll. And then I actually have one more before we go on, is what functionality do you utilize today to review and approve amounts for invoicing? So are you using Manager Transaction Review already today? The new hold billing on unpaid costs, billing worksheet, billing workflow approval. Perhaps you're using forms and approval or other, we know we have some custom approvals in there or other manual approvals. Let me go ahead and kick that off. Okay, the poll should now be open. And you guys a chance to answer that one. Okay. I think I'm going to end the poll. So you can see that, so we do have folks using Manager Transaction Review, although I have to say one of those two answers were from me. I guess I need to respond in order to kick it off. Billing worksheet, which is often very typical with grants, and then the custom approvals and other manual approvals. Okay, so nobody quite yet on hold billing, billing workflow approval, or forms and approval. Great for that. All right, let's jump into Manager Transaction Review. So this functionality has actually been around quite a while, since at least 9.1. By using Project Manager Review component, project managers can review, actually adjust if necessary, and approve transactions before the transactions are sent through the billing process. So how do you go about turning on this functionality if you're interested? It is initially at an installation level. So you see in the bottom left down here, checking this checkbox turns it on at the high level, and then we have additional options at a lower level. So by project type, after you turned on this feature, you can then decide which projects with their related project types do you want to have to review in order to release transactions to billing. If you don't want certain projects to have to go through that review process, you can simply say, hey, I want them auto-reviewed and automatically checked as reviewed. Okay, so you do have that at the project type level, which then defaults to new projects being added. So I'm now at the project, the high review for billing. You can it will default based on your project type setting, but you have always the option to turn it off for a specific project. All right, so once you enable this feature, here is the Manager Transaction Review, or MTR, page where you have lots of search criteria in order to select the projects that you would like to review and approve for billing. So, business unit project ID, pretty common, but you see lots of other lower level criteria, as well as to view in both detail or summary level, including you can also search by the actual reviewed status. Okay, I want to see, okay, have I marked everything as reviewed? Which ones are not specifically not reviewed? So you can search by the reviewed status, and then also very important is the date type. So for example, accounting date, I can cut off my transactions as a particular month-end close to review everything through a particular month-end close. So once you've entered in your search criteria and click search, Here is the page where you can come in here to review, ultimately approve your transactions, or I mentioned there is the ability to trigger an adjustment at this stage as well. So what transactions you want to have reviewed is configured, and you can either review the cost, which if it's created in a priced row would also mark the corresponding price row as reviewed, or simply go straight to the billing, the BIL rows. So this is what that online review page would look like, where you have the ability to select individual transactions, or you can have select them en masse to mark them as reviewed. Anything that has been reviewed dynamically, the amounts are getting updated down here. We do find that our customers who are using this functionality think it's helpful to have a query to review the transactions, to bring in some additional information. So you may have attended the presentation by Anna Rundle and Spear MC yesterday. They mentioned they are utilizing the Manager Transaction Review page. So here's an example of one of their queries that they use. So something to keep in mind, that it may be helpful to have some additional queries as a part of the review process. Okay, also at the installation level, you have the option to review transactions that are outside the period of performance. So when you have that checked, you then have the ability to view on a separate tab those transactions that are falling outside the period of performance. And then recently in image 35, a new feature was added with Manager Transaction Review to allow you to go ahead and recognize revenue on transactions, but still go through the approval process to approve transactions before they're sent to billing. So here is that checkbox. I'm sorry, this is at the business unit level, not installation level. To turn on whether or not you would like to also review transactions for revenue, or have it just automatically be able to be processed before they are approved. So that's kind of, I think, a great new feature. I wanted to walk through, I mentioned Anna Rundle is one of our customers using Manager Transaction Review. Kaiser Permanente, we also worked on a project with them to roll out the use of Manager Transaction Review for their internally funded projects. So these are projects where there is no revenue because it's funded internally. However, the costs are reimbursed by transferring the cost to the entity providing the funds. So it's more facilitating a review and approval process for internal funds. So I guess I mentioned that already, using Manager Transaction Review to automate a cost reimbursement. It simplifies the billing and approval process, and it was also a way to standardize a business process and accounting as much as possible across business units. So Kaiser Permanente has multiple grants regions, and some of them are not quite live on the full grants processing, but we were able to create a business process using Manager Transaction Review within project costing to have a standard process across business units, even if they were not yet live on the grants modules. So that was really great. Here is a flow that gives you both the business process for the regions that are using the full grants modules. Those are the ones in green. The yellow boxes or highlighted shapes are those who are not quite yet on all of the grants modules. So essentially what you see is as costs are collected into Proj Resource, the region will review their transactions. If they need to make adjustments, obviously they'll make the appropriate adjustments. And then once they're reviewed and ready to request that cost reimbursement, they will send a query to their sponsor, and then the other business unit, the funding business unit, will then go into the system and mark in Manager Transaction Review those transactions as approved. Once they do that, the rows in project costing, when you click reviewed and approved in MTR, they change the flags in project resource to Y, and that then allows those transactions to generate accounting entries and send to the GL. Okay, so a little different angle on it. You could use this functionality for approving transactions to be sent to billing, but also in this example, you see it's approving journal entries, cost transfers to be created. So for the generation of the accounting entries between business units, Kaiser is utilizing project organization. So the way that this works is on the project. This is a setup item when you're setting up the project to indicate the funder, the funding business unit, as well as the rest of the string, department, location, affiliate. And then through the accounting rules, we can determine that debit and credit side of the entry for that cost reimbursement. So on the resource is the resource general ledger business unit. That is the regions that's spending, incurring the costs. And then over here on the project general ledger unit, that is the business unit reimbursing those costs. Okay, so through the manager transaction review, along with project organization, we're able to generate that cost transfer once the costs are approved. All right, so something to think about when you're looking, if you're looking to use Manager Transaction Review is there was a bug around not being able to unapprove a transaction once you've approved it before it had gone to the GL. I mean, if it's gone to the GL, then yeah, that makes sense. You can't touch it, but there was a bug. So watch out for that based on your image level. It has now been fixed, but just make sure you test for that. If you're utilizing the delivered F&A program, as of right now, the functionality will mark F&A SFA rows as automatically approved. It's something probably where an idea should be logged to have that updated. In my mind, that it shouldn't. The F&A should follow any other direct costs, but so keep in mind that that's how it works right now. Same thing with transaction adjustment. If you're utilizing this feature, it does automatically mark the transactions as approved. Also consider the timing of price transactions. So if you bring over labor and create fringes through rate sets, those transactions would need to be approved before you could send them to the GL. So the timing of the review, as well as needing to get those accounting entries generated to the GL, is something you should consider. And then I'll mention this already, the online review page versus query might be helpful and necessary to create an additional query to help with that review process. Okay, I'm going to quickly pause here to see if anybody has any questions before I go on to the next topic. Looking at the chat, I don't see anything yet. Okay, so I will keep plowing through. All right, so the next topic is hold billing on unpaid costs. This is a new feature that was rolled out in image 30. So here's PeopleSoft's definition of this, posted in the cumulative features overview. Enhance the rate-based contract billing and revenue process to prevent unpaid project costs from being sent to PeopleSoft billing and GL. So when you look at the contract, you can see two new flags, hold billing and unpaid costs, as well as hold revenue. So this feature allows billing and revenue to be placed on hold when the associated costs have not been paid. So the transactions we're talking about here are accounts payable and expenses, where we have that link to determine if they've been paid. So at the installation level, if you look over to the left, I'm highlighting once again some slides from Kaiser, who's turned this on, and we can talk about how they went about it. So at the bottom left here, turning on this installation level default will have hold billing on unpaid costs checked as you create new customers, which would then default the settings to your new awards. And so when the contracts to billing interface runs, it is dynamically determining that paid status when the process is run. So if you look here, we've kicked off the process, and it's telling you 2 transactions for accounts payable have not been paid and were excluded for processing. So at the time I ran the billing, it made that determination and held certain bill rows, 2 in this case, from being sent to billing. It's really cool that they also rolled out a update tool to take your existing contracts and convert them to these new statuses. So at the top of the page, you have various criteria to determine the checkbox that you want to update. So update contract and lines. The update contract piece, we're talking about the billing options page, which is kind of like your defaults for when you're creating new contract lines for a customer, for a contract, as well as the actual contract lines themselves. Here's the navigation in case you were looking for this mass update page. So after you've put in your search criteria, down below you can see now you have the list of your contracts that you can update, the statuses for hold billing, as well as if you elect to use the hold revenue. So something to keep in mind, like even though this is a really nice update tool, you do still need to manually check the boxes. So we can select all here to select our contracts. That opens up the ability to check these flags, but then you still have a sort of a manual process to check the boxes. Okay, so after you select your contracts, check the boxes to update. When you click the update button at the bottom, then it will be updating either the billing options based on what you've selected, the lines, and then this is also available now on the award profile, which is a view to your contract. Okay, so these are the steps that Kaiser Permanente went through to turn on this feature. So they manually checked that contract installation options flag. For the hold billing, they are not using the hold revenue on unpaid costs, but we do appreciate that you have the ability to do both. So new customers will be defaulted to checked. Keep in mind, you can always uncheck them for specific customers as needed. Then a SQL update was utilized to update all the existing customers, grant customers, I should be more specific. And then they utilized that hold billing and revenue on unpaid costs mass update page to update all of their existing contracts. And then they did need to create a new query that included the paid status for vouchers and expenses. So some of the lessons learned here for this functionality is do expect, because that paid status is not a field right on Proj Resource, it's determined dynamically. You may need to make tweaks to your existing queries or reports. As well as perhaps the security, since you're going to be reaching into another module that may or more complicated than just simply adding in some new tables. Okay, I'm checking the chat to see any questions on this feature before I go to the next one. going. I guess I should have said, on hold billing and unpaid costs. I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch to say this is a review and approval process. Um, it is, but it is restricting the type of data that can go to billing. So I thought it would be kind of helpful to include in this topic. Obviously, the billing worksheet, this is typically used with grants, so you guys are probably pretty familiar with this. The billing worksheet is a temporary work area which you can review, adjust, defer, approve, and technically delete the billing lines from the billing interface process before you create actual bills. Here, where is it sitting in the billing process? So contracts, which controls your billing and revenue, uh, sends data to the billing interface, and after you process the billing interface, it creates a temporary billing worksheet where you can go and review and approve your invoices. That is obviously optional, so that's determined based on your contract billing plan setting, which we'll see in a second. So up here on the left is your billing worksheet, where you can either decide, oh, I totally messed up, I need to send it totally back and start over, and that's where we have the ability to delete the temporary worksheet, send it totally back. Also, at an individual bill line level, we can determine if we want to, in fact, defer certain items if we're not, if we know there needs to be an adjustment, we can defer those lines, which will require you to put in a deferred date, where we can send through an adjustment and then create that invoice for the sponsor. Okay, so where is that setting? Once again, the billing plan determines whether or not it will create that temporary worksheet, or if you want to bypass it, you can check it as pre-approved. And this initial billing plan setting is defaulted in from your billing plan detailed template. So if there are certain invoices that you're, hey, it's not a value add anymore for us to review these anymore, it's just simply adding an extra step, then certain types of products or bill types, you can default that to be pre-approved. Okay, and then just a note here on some recent changes here around the billing temporary invoices. In image 23, there was a cross-reference file between the temporary worksheet bills and the real bills that are created that is accessible through the bill inquiry page. So if it's helpful to be able to see that link of, okay, here's my real bill, what was the actual temporary invoice number? They have added that on the bill inquiry page to check out. Okay, I will pause again before we go into the last topic to see if there are any questions on this billing worksheet functionality. All right, the next one, this is one of my favorites, the billing worksheet approval. Right, so this was actually released back in 9.1. PeopleSoft provided an example workflow for credit invoices, but really as of that point, you could start creating your own billing workflow approval process using whatever criteria that you wanted. And then quite a few improvements over time to this functionality. So in image 22, we see that it was fluid. In image 24, now you can utilize the billing approval process for invoices that come through the billing worksheet. So we just were talking about the billing worksheet functionality, which is often used for data coming in from grants and contracts. So starting in image 24, you have the ability now to send those invoices through the billing approval process, even if they've gone through the billing worksheet, which is exciting. And then image 39, we have, oh, this is like brand new, guys. We enhance the billing approval process to use the new delegation framework, have the ability to delegate authority to other users. So that's exciting as well. I'm also going to use Kaiser Permanente for this use case example 2. They turned on billing invoice approvals for certain types of grants invoices, which we'll talk through. This is where you turn the functionality on at the billing business unit definition level. So we notice we have enable invoice approvals. Also check out this box, enable worksheet approval. So that was that new functionality that says, hey, yes, if it goes through the billing worksheet, I can still go through this process. And then that process ID, this can be your own specific billing invoice approval criteria. As I mentioned, there is a delivered one for credit approvals, which is great to have an example to look at, but you have the ability to define your own rules. Right, so this flow chart is indicating the inter-unit billing process that Kaiser has turned on for their interregional subrecipient billing. So I mentioned before we had internal billing using manager transaction review. That was where it was funding through internal funds. However, Kaiser often has awards that one region will receive from an external sponsor and then have a portion of that research performed by another region at KP. They had a need to be able to automate this type of billing, including having a approval process by the prime region. So if you want to know more information about the complete inter-unit billing solution, let me know. We have a full presentation on that, as well as a presentation on the manager transaction review. So I'm not going to cover the whole solution. I want to focus in on the billing approvals, but how the flow works here underneath is the subrecipient region. That's the region that is receiving and doing the actual research, incurring the costs. Up on top is the prime region, who initially received the award and who needs to approve the invoice from the subrecipient. We were able to actually create a standard business process for both business units that were fully configured for grants, as well as business units that were not live on all of the grants functionality. So the one kind of difference here, you see this yellow box. The regions not yet live on grants are actually uploading their invoices into billing versus initiating it from contracts. Okay, so you can use the billing approval process for both those incoming invoices created by contracts or added or uploaded directly into billing. Yeah, so one of the requirements was I don't want any accounting entries to be booked onto the prime's books until that invoice was approved. So that's indeed how the flow works. So the subrecipient submits the invoice to billing, and then not until that invoice is approved can it be finalized, which then begins the various accounting entries. All right, so another thing that is really nice about the billing workflow approval process is that it is configurable to allow you to have different rules for in this case, different business units, but you could have a whole variety of criteria. So for Kaiser, they did find it, very important to standardize business processes across the board. However, In terms of workflow, there are a little variation in the regions of their approval steps, but the overall flow is standard. Standard in the sense that it utilizes the project team to find the approvals. Okay, so everybody's going to the project team. It's also standard that everybody needs to go through an FDA approver, and it is selected by a specific role. Okay, so it's not their workflow is not sequential in terms of if it's this dollar amount, it gets approved by this person. If it's over that a dollar amount, then it goes to the next approver, and if it's even more than that, then it goes up one more level. It's the fiscal approval is just one person that is selected and approves the invoice. Okay, so the regions you see across the board. So we have our Colorado, Georgia, Northern California, Washington, and then notice some of the steps are able to be configured as skipped. So if by chance it couldn't find a particular role, we do have it configured that it can skip it and move on to the next step. So you'll see a little variation between the regions of which roles, the sequence of roles that it goes through. Our developers were able to create this cool criteria for number 3. First, it will look for the PID, the PI designee. If it doesn't find that role, it will next look for the project manager role. If it doesn't find them, that ultimately it's going to look for the PI to route to. So that was really kind of cool. Gives you some flexibility where, some projects may be a little smaller and they may just have a PI versus others that, we really want the project manager to have that approval. That was neat that we could include that criteria. Okay, so here's an example of walking through that billing approval process. On the subrecipient side, so the region that is initiating the invoice, they're using all delivered functionality. So once the invoice is in a ready status, it can be submitted for approval, and you can click in and see the approval status. You guys may be familiar with this if you're using approvals in other areas. So here we see it's pending the first step and therefore has not yet routed to the billing invoice approval. We also, I mentioned, have the ability to skip a step. If they didn't find an approver, we determine which steps can be skipped. Here's an example of that where, okay, they couldn't find one of those roles, so then it was automatically routed to the next invoice billing approver step. Continue on with that. As these approvals are routed, they do create a work list entry. You could also have an email generated as well. And then on the prime approval side, due to security requirements, Kaiser did decide to make a custom approval page. So if you're interested in this sort of functionality of taking in the delivered workflow and linking it in with custom processes or custom pages, we also have a presentation that's focused. So this is what the custom page looks like. Pretty similar to the delivered page with some additional information. One, at the very bottom of the page, it's telling you what is the DL distribution that will be charged once the invoice is finalized, so that approver can see it right off the bat. And then here, notice we have a fiscal approval box. So depending on the role that you have, you will, well, there's really just one role, the billing invoice approver. They need to select who is that ultimate fiscal approver. Okay, so they click the lookup box here. We can see the approval amounts by user, and they can pick the appropriate fiscal approver for their region. Okay. Oh, I forgot to say, this is another really cool feature. So I thought I had a slide for it. Sorry, guys. What was really cool too is on this custom page, we made it dynamic based on supplemental data to through configuration. For example, if we rolled out another chart field, this page would automatically be updated for that additional chart field. So that was really kind of cool. Right, so when the billing invoice approver is ready to approve, they can click approve. We do have one additional validation, which was part of our requirements. Are you sure? If not, you have a chance to back out. Click OK, then we can see it is now routed to the next approver, which is our fiscal approver. So that fiscal approver logs in. Again, now, based on their role, they don't have the ability or need to select a fiscal approver. They can go ahead and approve it. Before they approve, I wanted to let you know we do have we bring in the functionality of the billing supporting documents. Okay, so as part of this business process, the subrecipient uploads the invoice or any additional supporting documents so the prime can view those documents as a part of the invoice review process. Great, so let's take a look at the configuration. I wanted to highlight the approval process setup just to show you, kind of how flexible and easy it is to define your own rules. So the approval process setup has stages, paths, and steps. And so if you look at the paths, you'll notice that we have a separate path for each of the business units. And that's where we have the ability to determine for each region what is the various steps that the region wants the invoice approval to go through. At the very top of the definition, we're indicating the criteria that which invoices should go through this approval process. So for Kaiser, any of the invoices that have a bill type of INT, so we have a specific bill type for these transactions, which defaults in from your contract setup. If it's interregional, INT, then it goes through these rules. Otherwise, any other bill type will automatically be set to approved. So that's the higher level criteria. It doesn't care about the dollar amounts. Any invoice INT will go through this approval process. As we get into our steps here, so we notice, stages. When we get to a stage that has a prime business unit value of 0201, then we know which steps we need to take. So underneath that stage, I guess there's really only one stage and multiple paths underneath the path's various steps. Once we get into 0201 business unit, then going down into the steps level, we can start adding in the various and whether they need to be, can be skipped, the number of invoice approvers you need, and then obviously you need to define how does the system determine the approvers? And there's a lot of, I don't know if I have a screenshot in here, but a lot of flexibility in determining who the approvers are. It can be through simply a query, or it can be through a role, SQL definition. I believe app class is the other one. So a lot of options on telling the system how you identify the approvers. Okay, so in terms of lessons learned specifically around the workflow. We did need to time the rollout of the workflow with image 24. So fortunately, that the timing worked out pretty well with being able to target the rollout after one of Kaiser's updates projects, so that we could have invoices coming in from grants through the billing worksheet and go through this approval process. We did, along with having a specific bill type of INT, we also changed the invoice numbering to have a specific prefix for these types of inter-unit bills. Looking back, I mean, it's very nice to be able to visually see that and pick them out, just because these invoices go through a separate flow. Ultimately, did we really need that? Not sure, but it did end up causing a cumulative amount calculation error in the existing custom invoice because of a different invoice numbering. It didn't work with their existing invoice number. So something to consider if you're creating, changing the invoice numbering to just be, you may need to update your invoice formats. And then, for these examples where invoices are going through the billing worksheet, the billing worksheet, as we mentioned, that's your chance to make adjustments, right? To say, oh, shoot, these transactions don't look right. I'm not ready to send it to the sponsor. I can defer them and send them back. So the sequence of the billing approval process is it needs to be in a ready status, right? So you first need to approve the temporary worksheet, and then it becomes the real ready invoice. At that point is when you can send it off to your for approval. Well, at that point, if the approver said, hey, what about this? I don't like that. It's already a real invoice, right? And we can't just simply send that invoice back to be generated. So you do have options, obviously. You can send adjustments through, and once you're on the billing worksheet, you can add those temporary invoice lines to an existing invoice, but that existing invoice needs to be in a particular status to add it to the real invoice. So options there, but yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a bummer sequence-wise of that, the billing invoice approval comes a little later in the business process. Okay, so that was all I had for the presentation. A reminder to fill out your surveys, and here is my contact information. If you have additional questions that you have or want to get a copy of any of those presentations I mentioned earlier, but I will once again open it up for any questions. Be some questions, don't be shy. Okay, I don't see anything coming in, so I guess that means everything is crystal clear. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I will end it here and give everybody a few minutes back. Great rest of your week, guys. Thank you.